Matthew 16. The Pharisees and Sadducees came and, testing him, asked him to show them a sign from heaven. But he answered them, "When it is evening, you say, 'It will be fair weather, for the sky is red.' In the morning, it will be foul weather today, for the sky is red and threatening." Hypocrites! You know how to discern the appearance of the sky, but you can't discern the signs of the times. An evil and adulterous generation seeks a sign, and there will be no sign given it, except the sign of the prophet Jonah. He left them and departed. So, the Pharisees and Sadducees now, these are two groups that are rather diametrically opposed to each other. Rather like, Republicans and Democrats today in America, like, your ideological approach to things is just different. So, for instance, the Pharisees, they don't believe in the afterlife. And they're like, we only take the first 5 books of the Bible or the Pentateuch, right? Or the Pentateuch. And then the Pharisees are like, what are you doing? Why are you only taking those first 5? And what do you mean there's no resurrection? What are you even talking about, right? So they have, they're diametrically opposed to each other. Plus, the Sadducees are currently in charge of the entire temple system, whereas the Pharisees are focused on the Torah and the law and saying, no, this is what's actually important. So you even have what's the important thing right now? And both of them are kind of not doing great. So the Essenes, which is another group, they're like, peace out, we're going to the desert. Okay, so you have these different groups who are doing different things. The Pharisees and Sadducees normally are not aligned. But the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So they team up and they're like, okay, we need a sign from you. And as far as I can tell, the commentaries on this are rather unclear. They're uncertain as to what is this sign, what's the purpose, what are they going for? Like, are they trying to validate Jesus and saying, hey, you need to give us some kind of supernatural sky thing to really make this happen? Are they asking for something that they can then discredit him by? What's really going on? That is unclear, apparently. At least I'm unclear on it based off of the reading that I've done. So there we go. Okay. But Jesus is like, it doesn't matter. Okay? It doesn't matter what you guys are angling for. It doesn't matter what your aim is. All right. Because he says, hey, you know how to look at the sky and tell how the weather is. And we have this, right? Red sky in evening, the red sky at night, traveler's delight, red sky in morning, travelers take warning, or whatever. And so we have these phrases, we have these things where we can look at the sky and be like, I can tell what's coming. And he's like, but you guys can't do, you guys don't even get what's going on. It's not like Jesus has not been doing miracles. It's not that he hasn't been saying things. It's not that he hasn't been doing stuff. So they're asking for something specific, and he's like, I'm not giving you that. You should be able to see by now what I'm doing, right? And then he says, you're also looking for a sign. You're an evil and adulterous generation. You guys are not good. He says, the only sign I'm going to give you is the sign of Jonah. And actually, what's interesting is that this has already happened in Matthew. This is a repeat. We've already dealt with this before. And he's already said, hey, I'm only going to give you the sign of Jonah. And what's the sign of Jonah? Well, as New Testament Christians, we tend to think, oh, well, it's he's in the fish for 3 days, and then Jesus is in the ground for 3 days, and so there's that connection. And Jesus makes that connection. Not here, but he does make that connection. So it makes sense for us reading our Bibles to be like, yeah, so it's like he's going to die and rise again 3 days later, kind of like Jonah here. But that's probably not what's in view here, because this isn't what's started. We haven't gotten here yet. So what's likely the case is that the sign of Jonah is that pagans are repenting, that people are coming back to God. And that's absolutely what's been happening, especially if you go back to the previous chapter. That's literally what's been going on. And so Jesus is like, hey, look, are people hearing the good news? Are people hearing of the kingdom, and are they repenting? Well, what's happening then, right? Okay. So that's sign of Jonah, right? He left them and departed. So he's like, and I'm out. Okay. The disciples came to the other side and had forgotten to take bread. So now they're traveling back across the little Sea of Galilee. They're doing this all the time, okay? And they'd forgotten to bring bread. And Jesus said to them, take heed and beware of the yeast of the Pharisees and Sadducees. And they reasoned among themselves, saying, we brought no bread. Okay, so they're like, Jesus is talking about yeast. We didn't bring any bread. That's got to be what it is, right? We're just going to take a literal interpretation here of what Jesus' words are, literally interpreting them. And Jesus, perceiving it, said, why do you reason among yourselves, you of little faith, because you have brought no bread? Don't you yet perceive or remember the 5 loaves for the 5,000 and how many baskets you took up? How many was that? Sorry, 12 for Israel, the 5, 12. Those are both very Israel numbers, right? We're talking about Jesus reaching to the Israelite community. Okay. Or the 7 loaves for the 4,000 and how many baskets you took up? Again, he's got those numbers, right? 7 and 4 being these very Gentile numbers for the whole world. So his ministry is also for everybody, ultimately. That's ultimately where this thing is going. And also remember, he doesn't mention the number of fish because that number doesn't pertain to things, even in the previous chapter. Okay, so he's like, and how many baskets you took up? How is it that you don't perceive that I don't speak to you concerning bread? You think I need bread? What do you think these multiplication miracles are about? I need bread? Okay, what are you guys doing? Okay. But beware the yeast of the Pharisees and Sadducees. And then they understood that he didn't tell them to beware of the yeast of bread, but of the teaching of the Pharisees and Sadducees. I love it. Okay. Yeah, sometimes we struggle to get things. Okay, it's very clear, but it's not clear. Okay, the teachings, okay, yeast, okay? And it's interesting because Jesus has already used this yeast analogy before, talking about the kingdom of God. It starts out, you just put in a little bit, and then you just mix it in, and it slowly takes over the whole thing. That's the kingdom of God. That's the positive account. Now he's using the negative one, where he's saying that, okay, you put in a little bit of bad, and it's just gonna go everywhere. And it's interesting because New Testament interpretation of yeast is often negative. It's an often negative thing. But Old Testament, like you get rid of your yeast, but like that's in the context of getting out of slavery and like escaping Egypt and like having to move quickly and stuff like that. And so it's later traditions that move it into like, hey, it's sin, and then the Christian tradition takes that and runs with it. And apparently I've heard from some of my Jewish friends where they're like, yeah, we don't get that whole like sin yeast connection. What's going on? Whereas the commentaries that I've been looking at like to make that yeast sin connection. They're like, hey, yeah, that should be very clear in the Old Testament. And so apparently it's not as clear, or it's a developed idea that happens, kind of over the intertestamental period and or in the first, second century. I don't know. So that's kind of interesting to me. Have you heard anything on that? Let me know below. Okay, all right. The teachings. Okay. Now, when Jesus came into the parts of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, saying, "Who do men say that I am? That I, the Son of Man, am?" They said, "Some say John the Baptist, some Elijah, and others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." Okay, so they're moving into ever more pagan territory. Caesarea Philippi is not a good city. It's very pagan, very not good stuff going on over there. They worship the god Pan, and so that there's like all kinds of sexual stuff going on. Like it's just not a good city. So they're wandering through this very pagan place, and Jesus is like, "Hey, who do people think I am?" Right? Like, disciples. People have all kinds of crazy theories. They think that you might be John the Baptist. Remember Herod? Okay. And then other people are saying Elijah, right? Which, he needed to come at some point in time. So maybe you're that, or Jeremiah, or one of the other prophets, right? Like you're somebody, like you gotta be somebody pretty important, right? You're doing all this crazy stuff. And he says, "But who do you say that I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." Jesus answered him, "Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. I also tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my assembly, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth will have been bound in heaven, and whatever you release on earth will have been released in heaven." Then he commanded his disciples that they should tell no one that he was Jesus the Christ. Okay, there's a ton to unpack here. So first, Peter is like, "Hey, you're the Christ. You're the Son of the living God." And Jesus says, "Yeah, awesome. Blessed are you." All right, Bar-Jonah, son of Jonah. Okay, "For flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but rather my Father in heaven." So apparently, from what I've heard, you have like different ways of interpreting or understanding scripture. So you start out, especially in the Jewish mind. So the Jewish mind, you start out and you have like the literal reading, like what's happening in the text. Okay, so like, hey, don't muzzle an ox while it's working. Okay, so like don't stop it from eating. That's it. Okay, and then there's like the deeper meaning. What's this actually about, right? Like And that's where Jesus in other places is like, you think it's about animals? No, this is about how we treat people and treat things. Like that, it's far more than just like, hey, when you're doing this, don't muzzle the ox. No, like, how do we treat people? That's really what's going on in Scripture right now. Okay? And then there's like the third tier. And the third tier is where God gives you divine revelation to understand something that you don't understand any other way. Like you're not going to just be able to figure this out. And so Jesus says, yeah, you just got to that third level. You just leveled up, got to level 3. You're awesome. This is amazing. So like Peter is like, woohoo! Like this is great. This is like awesome. To be able to get to this is like highlight right here. Like this is the greatest. And then beyond that, right? Jesus says, hey, you're Peter, which is like rock. And then he's like, and on this rock, so he's making a joke, a pun with that. He's saying, I'm going to build my assembly, or I'm going to build my church, and the gates of hell or Hades will not prevail against it. So like, even on Peter, like, wow. Okay, by the way, this is also where Catholics get the idea that we have to have a direct descendant or direct line to Peter because Peter is that foundation of everything. Protestants, of course, disagree with that interpretation. And the commentaries that I'm reading are Protestant, so they're like, yeah, it doesn't even make sense to claim that. So, take that, whatever. Okay. And then he says, beyond that, I'm going to give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven. And whatever you bind on earth will be bound, and whatever you're going to loose is also loose, right? So like he's got this thing where like he also has the keys, which is why in art you'll often see Peter, he's the one with the keys. He's got keys because here, this passage. And then also beyond that, it's also why we talk about Peter as being the one at the pearly gates, like letting you into heaven or not, because you've got the keys. You're like the top dog who's like, hey, are we going to let you in or not, right? So like this passage is why we have all of these kind of cultural ideas about Peter and in this way. Make sense? Okay, I hope so. All right, so it's this whole idea, and binding and loosing is like you get to decide. You can choose. Like, is this good? Is this bad? Are we going for this? Are we not? Like, you have that kind of authority. Jesus gives it to him. Okay, and then he says, "Don't tell anyone I'm the Messiah. I'm the Christ." Why? Right? Like Peter just got this divine download, right? Like, that's how some people talk about things. And now Jesus is like, don't tell anybody. Why, we wonder? Well, let's read on. From that time, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders, chief priests, and scribes, and be killed, and the third day be raised up. Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, far be it from you, Lord, this will never be done to you. Okay? But he, Jesus, turned and said to Peter, get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me, for you are not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of men. So Jesus is like, hey, by the way, guys, don't tell anybody I'm the Messiah. I'm heading my way to Jerusalem, and I'm going to suffer, and I'm going to get killed. And don't worry, I'm going to come back. And Peter is like, okay, so I've just leveled up. I'm level 3. I now have, I'm like the foundation for things. I've got the keys. I'm binding, losing. I can make choice. Like, this is Jesus. Now, come on, man. That's not how this goes down, and you know it. This is not how we do things, okay? Which, apparently, to the first century, this would have been shocking. Like, this is not how you talk to rabbis, even if you've leveled up. You might say, hang on, Rabbi, I don't understand. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. That doesn't sound right. Like, can you explain this a little bit more? But no, Peter is like, yeah, we're going. Like, no, you don't get to, this is not happening. And Jesus says, get behind me, Satan. And Satan, of course, means adversary. And in the Old Testament, it's always the adversary. It's not a personal noun or name. It's just the adversary in the Old Testament. But by now, with Jesus in this time period, we now have the idea of the divine rebel, that one back in Eden is now like he's the adversary, right? He's not just he's Satan, right? Now adversary is divine rebel. They've made this link. They've done that. So Jesus is like, look, you're now the adversary. You're being a stumbling block, and you are thinking about man's thing instead about God's thing. And what you need to be thinking about is God's thing. So Peter goes from like top dog to like bottom right now, like not doing well because he not only rebuked, which he shouldn't have done, but then Jesus also gives him a slap down and calls him Satan. That's pretty hardcore. Okay. Then Jesus said to his disciples, and in, I think it's in Mark, Jesus actually calls a crowd then and is like, hey, everybody, come together here. Check this out, okay? And by the way, he's still in Caesarea Philippi. This is still the pagan city, okay? So if he calls a crowd, like, oh my God, okay. So he says, if anyone desires to come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. For whoever desires to save his life will lose it, and whoever will lose his life for my sake will find it. For what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and forfeits his life? Or what will a man give in exchange for his life? For the Son of Man will come in the glory of his Father with his angels, and then he will render to everyone according to his deeds. Most certainly, I tell you, there are some standing here who will in no way taste of death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. So Jesus is like, Peter, you don't get it. You're thinking human thoughts. That's not how we do things. We think about what God wants us to do, and we do that. And he says, and by the way, hey, everybody, check this out. If you want to actually follow me, if you want to be my disciple, then you need to deny yourself and take up your cross. And this imagery is stark at this point in time. This is intense. We don't have crucifixions happening all the time. They did. Apparently, shortly before Jesus was born, there was like an uprising, and Rome like slaughtered 2,000 people. They crucified them, and they just lined them along the road. Right? Like, you don't want to do this. You don't want to do this. You don't want to do this. You really don't want to do this. Hey, we could put you up here too. You know, like we don't want you. So like, crucifixion is a common thing at this point in time, and the Romans had perfected this truly horrific way of dying, because what you're going to do is you're not only going to like pierce through you, right, and do that, but then you also don't die from that. You actually die because you can't pull yourself up to breathe. Like, apparently it stretches out your lungs in a weird way, so you have to like pull yourself up. So now you're pulling on the nails, okay, and then you're trying to get your breath, okay, and so you eventually suffocate from that. And apparently they'd also like gotten really good at it, so they like knew how to put like a little like seat thing on the cross, like right where your butt would like, you might be able to do it and you can't. Like they just messed with you. Like it was awful. Okay, so it's like a really terrible way to die. And Jesus is like, if you want to follow me, you have to deny yourself like you're on your way to die. This horrific, gruesome way. And when they're taking up their cross, they're taking up the cross beam part. They're not carrying the whole cross. There's images of that. That's wrong. They carry just the cross beam. The whole cross would be too heavy, especially if you'd actually received the lashes, the 40-1, and all that. Like you wouldn't be able to do it. But they're just carrying the cross beam, and it's lashed to you. It's tied onto you, and you're going through the streets with that. So everybody knows you're on your way to a horrific death, and they know that Rome has you, and you're out. So like, there's also scorn and public shame and all of that associated with this as well, on top of everything. And Jesus is like, yeah, you want to follow me? You gotta make your life like you're doing that, like you're on your way to die, a horrific way. Because if you want to save your life, you're going to lose it. But whoever will lose his life for my sake will find it. They're again using that like literal death analogy imagery to be like, hey, this is what this is all about. For what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and yet forfeits his life? For what can a man give in exchange for his life or his soul, right? Like, there's different translations of this. And that word exchange there is like, what could possibly compare in value to this? Like, this is way more. This is so much more than that, right? So like, what your life, your soul is worth so much more. So like, you can get the whole world and it doesn't hold a candle to what this is. Like, so yeah, give up your life. Follow me. And then this is interesting because he's just said, like, I'm going to die, guys. I'm going to die. No, he says, I'm going to rise again, but I'm going to die. And then it says, for the Son of Man will come in glory, in the glory of his Father with his angels, and then he will render to everyone according to his deeds. So there's also this like triumphant return thing that's also here. Like Jesus, like it's this really confusing picture that people are like, I don't know if I fully understand this whole thing. Okay. So he's doing that. And he's actually quoting, in a lot of ways, he's bringing up, he's alluding to this passage in Daniel 7, starting in verse 13. I saw in the night visions, and behold, there came with the clouds of the sky one like the Son of Man, and he came even to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him. Dominion was given to him, and glory, and a kingdom, that all the peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which will not pass away, and his kingdom one that which will never be destroyed. So Jesus is like, hey, yeah, the Son of Man is coming. Okay, so there's that Son of Man coming on the clouds, like all of this glory of the Father, right? So like there's all of this. So he's like, yeah, so yeah, I'm that guy. I'm that one. I'm getting full dominion. I'm getting complete control. But I'm also gonna go suffer and die, right? Like, yeah, okay. So why does Jesus say, don't tell anybody I'm the Messiah? Because they don't understand what the Messiah is going to do. And you start telling people, yeah, Jesus is the Messiah. Yeah, he's gonna kick out Rome. He's gonna start doing all. He's gonna take names. He's gonna say, this guy. Look at him. Yeah, we're so excited. And Jesus is like, that's not what's happening. I'm gonna go die. Don't worry, I'm coming back. But like, I'm gonna go die. And Peter, who like got it, like didn't get it at all, right? And then we get to verse 28. Most certainly I will tell you, there are some standing here who will in no way taste of death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. What? And maybe that's not weird for them first hearing this, but I'm guessing it's weird for us because we're like, but some of them haven't died yet? Like, Jesus hasn't come back yet, right? Like, all those other people, like the wackos are like wrong about, like, Jesus hasn't, what's going on here, right? Have you ever wondered that? But before we go any further, I'd love to know if you've felt that way before, if you've wondered about this passage. What's going on? And this is an example of where the fact that we have chapter markers in our Bibles is actually probably causing us more trouble than it's worth at this point in time. Now, chapter markers versus amazingly helpful for referencing and all that kind of stuff. Terrible because we tend to read just a chapter and be like, good, I read my chapter for the day. So like we read it, it's cool, and then we stop, and then we come back as like whole new thought. But this was written not to be like, hey, here's this, like it's gonna keep going. So just for now, let's keep going for a second here, okay? All right. So let's go to chapter 17. After 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John, his brother, and brought them up into a high mountain by themselves. He was changed, or transfigured, before them. His face shone like the sun, and his garments became as white as the light. Behold, Moses and Elijah appeared and were talking with him. What? Okay, so he glows. It's like this thing that okay, this is in a lot of ways bring us back to like Moses when he goes before God, and then he like starts glowing because and then they're like, hey, put a veil on and stuff like that back. Okay, but like Jesus is there and he starts glowing, and then Moses and Elijah both show up and they're just talking and they're doing stuff. We'll probably rewind and visit this again, but like this is going on, and just to give us a little bit of background of what's happening here is we've got this is in Malachi chapter 4, starting in verse 4, for example. Remember the law of my servant Moses, the decrees and laws I gave him at Horeb for all Israel. See, I will send the prophet Elijah to you before that great and dreadful day of the Lord comes. He will turn the hearts of the parents to their children, and the hearts of the children to their parents, or else I will come and strike the land with total destruction. And by the way, this is how like the Protestant New Testament ends. Or Old Testament ends. Like right before the New Testament, this is it. This is where it stops. And so we've got this expectation of Moses and Elijah before the day of the Lord. And so Moses and Elijah, okay? So these guys are, the top of kind of Old Testament stuff. I mean, King David's cool, but like Moses, Elijah, like these guys are like there when it comes to like prophet stuff and like power and like leading people and like all that kind of thing. So here is Jesus getting glorified, transfigured, something I don't see regularly, okay? And now Moses and Elijah are there. Right, that's where we're going to stop for today. We'll probably rewind and hit these couple verses again and kind of get back into the swing of things. But where do people see Jesus coming in his kingdom, his glory? All right. We'll talk to you next time.